Welcome back for part 3 of our interview with Sam Hensler with Dynamic Analysis. Do you recommend contractors who can correct various structural issues? You don't have to name any per se, but do you have that list?
We provide a list. The guy that I didn't mention earlier, who's more or less gone out of his way to try and be able to deal with any of our recommendations, whether it's a foundation replacement or like a beam, like if we're taking out a bearing wall and replacing it with a beam, or replacing different size beams, or dealing with any sort of structural change. He's actually based out of Red Lodge, but does a lot of work in Billings, and that's Jamie Clemens with Northwest Contracting. There's a handful of other contractors that we work with who've gotten good at various other aspects. For instance, Northwest doesn't do any pier installs. They can contract that out, but we work with Montana Pairing and Concrete Lifting, Blake Stokey, who owns that, and they install and underpin the foundations that need to be lifted. They do the helical or push pile piers, the resistance piles that will correct any sort of differential settlement in a foundation. We also work with Yellowstone Structural Systems out of Bozeman, who does the same thing, and some other various structural issues in any of the substructure, anything below the framing. And there's a handful of other contractors out there that we've worked with to various degrees, but we do provide a list whenever there's specific issues that people are interested in. If we're going to seal a crack, then maybe Stronghold's the best person to contact about getting those cracks sealed. We can provide those lists just because we look at 800 to 1,000 houses a year, and make a lot of recommendations, and have gotten to know the people who work in that industry pretty well.
Cool. Good to know. Do you follow up after any reports have been issued? Or corrected, I should say.
Yeah, at the request of the client, we certainly can, and it's a very frequent request that we get. So it is something that we do pretty often. It is an additional fee if people want us to come and oversee, or I guess to quote, sign off on work that's been done based off of our recommendations. That's something we can do. There's limits to how much we can do. If we were recommending, so I can go over sort of a bad case and a good case. A bad case from our perspective would be us providing our standard structural letter that has kind of some general recommendations that are going to involve a lot of work that will eventually be completely concealed once it's all done and finished. If we get called out, a few months or a year later to come sign off on it, and we come and look, everything's hidden behind drywall. I mean, we can't see anything that's been done. Maybe the contractor or the homeowner can provide us some pictures, and that can maybe help us picture what was put together, but we can't really sign off on it with much confidence at that point. So the flip side of that would be, if we provide that sort of recommendation, and in that recommendation says, that this would require a repair plan. Most of our recommendations, especially if they're within the city limits, are going to require a building permit to do anyway. So you should have a full repair plan done. A repair plan is going to be different than our structural health check letter that we provide. That's more of your standard, what most people would call blueprints of an actual plan, a set of construction documents that a contractor can follow, that says exactly what to do, how to fasten everything, what the governing codes are. That would be provided to the city, and then a permit could be issued. And then through that process, you'd have the city inspectors checking it to make sure that it's done. And at the request of the client, we can either come in at specific stages to take a look to make sure that those issues have been done correctly, or we can come in after it's all done and kind of review everything with the homeowner and with the contractor, and go over all of our recommendations and compare it to what we see on site, and then provide a letter saying that it looks like it's been done in accordance with our recommendations.
Fantastic, love it. So have you ever walked up on a home and saw issues, and you're like, there is no way this can be corrected? It's worthless property now, other than grazing your horses.
Yeah, I mean, that happens. It's rare, especially for residential homes that are just light frame wood construction. They can take a complete walloping. Like, they're very flexible. It takes a lot to get them to that point. But in some rare cases, we've definitely looked at houses that are what we would say, in what helps us determine whether or not it's something that's unsalvageable, is would it cost more to address all these various issues that need to be addressed than it would be to just tear it down and start over. Okay. And when we do run into cases where it's like, well, we could dump $300,000-$400,000 into trying to just fix what's here, and you're still stuck with what's here. We haven't made any significant improvements to the look of the house or to any sort of bowing issues, but at the end of that, you'll get a letter saying that it's now structurally reliable. Maybe that's not worth it.
Yeah.
And at that point, we'd say it probably makes more sense to either try and limp this along to keep it safe so that you could put renters in it or something, and have it reviewed every so often just to make sure that everything's staying in place, or to just raise it and start over.
Gotcha. I like it. That was what our next question was, is when does it make sense to demolish and just start over, which we covered.
Yep. Sometimes there are people who have sentimental value attached to a structure, and we'll tell people, like, this is going to be, some of the language we might say is that we've gone beyond the usable life of the structure. Like the way that it was built, the issues that it's dealt with, and the lack of maintenance that it's had throughout its life have brought it to a point where we're basically replacing every bone in the house. And that's going to be extraordinarily expensive, and some people have the financial means and the sentimental value attached to a structure that they say, it doesn't matter, I just want to restore it. And so it's definitely a personal choice that people make, and all we can really do is provide the economic input to help aid that choice.
Gotcha. That makes sense. When does it make sense to raise a house and pour a new foundation? What circumstances lead to that decision?
Yeah, so when you get to, let's back up and say, what if we wanted to replace the foundation but keep the framing? So sometimes, and this happens pretty regularly, the framing's in good condition, house is good, people want to keep the house, but the foundation's in very terrible condition, and trying to fix the foundation is just going to be an ordeal. Or maybe we've gone beyond the point where some of the easier fixes would have been applicable. So for example, say we've got a structure that's sitting on top of a basement wall that does have that horizontal crack, that has that inward bowing, and that inward bowing is now at, say, 8 inches. We can't add tensile strength to it anymore. We've gone beyond the point where it's stable. There are some options where we could maybe pour a new wall inside of it, and then we have basically a foundation inside of a foundation, and that'll restore some stability to it. But that's also going to take up a lot of room. It's going to add a lot of weight to it, which could potentially start a new settlement cycle on some soils that just haven't seen that additional weight. So there's some risks associated with that. So sometimes people will choose to just start over with a new foundation, which is really going to be, it's going to be the highest cost, but it's also going to provide you with the greatest upside benefit. Especially if it's a house that, say, has a 6-foot basement or a 5.5-foot basement, or maybe a 4-foot crawl space, and we have to repair the foundation. It doesn't take much more effort to just put in a full height basement and get additional equity back out of that repair.
Absolutely.
Rather than only putting money into a structural repair, putting in some money for a repair and getting, doubling the living space.
Yeah.
So in certain cases, it makes a lot of sense to just start over with a new foundation, and that's a difficult process. Right now, there's the contractor I'd mentioned, Northwest, is the only one that I'm aware of that'll take one of those on at the moment, lift the house, crib it up, demolish the entire foundation so that it's just sitting up in the air on cribbing, on stilts, and then build a new foundation underneath it in place. Yeah. It's a large ordeal. It doesn't always go correctly.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of them around town, and I'm just like, wow, it's fascinating to see that done. Should a potential buyer be concerned if a follow-up report indicated no further issues are identified after the repairs have been made?
I guess it just depends. It depends on what the repairs are, and it depends on what the concerns of the homeowner is. All we can really do is provide information. So if there's information that's lacking that the homeowner needs, or assurance that the homeowner needs, then it might make sense for us to come and take a look and follow up and say whether or not there's outstanding additional concerns or not. But in a lot of cases, especially if it's something simple, may not, like say something like sealing a foundation crack. If you have a professional contractor who is experienced in sealing foundation cracks, someone like Stronghold, then I'd say it'd probably be a waste of money to have us come back out and look at it if all we said was just hire a professional contractor to seal these cracks, don't have to do anything else.
Yeah.
And in certain cases where, say, it's something that's really similar, where we're saying that we do have to seal cracks, but we also have to apply these really specific structural corrections, like external steel reinforcement that has specific requirements for the steel, specific requirements for the fastening, and specific spacing requirements, then it probably makes sense for us to come back and look at it, just because we've seen a lot of that done incorrectly, and it's really easy for us to come take a look and say, yep, this was done correctly, or it will be immediately obvious that it was done incorrectly and needs to be done over.
Gotcha.